fellas, do you like good juicy movies? My name's Carmilla and I sure do, and I'd like to talk about a few today. American Fiction is the debut film from director Cord Jefferson, and it's an adaptation of the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. The story follows a black author, played by Jeffrey Wright, whose literary works are respected but not particularly popular. Frustrated with the type of quote-unquote black books that find mainstream success, he writes the most stereotypically black book that he can under a pseudonym as a kind of middle finger to the publishing industry. But of course, they eat it up, they think it's going to be a bestseller, and offer a very generous publication contract. This is a very watchable and enjoyable film that's easy to get sucked into. There's a lot of intelligent, if on-the-nose commentary on the publishing industry, and also Hollywood and entertainment in general. There are honestly some really thoughtful and well-balanced conversations about not just specifically what kinds of black stories should be told and the variety that should be there, but also just the value of high art versus pulp. It's a lot less preachy than what I was expecting, and there's one particular conversation towards the end between Jeffrey Wright and Issa Rae that I honestly found really profound. There was one particular line in this scene that kind of blew my mind with how simply it articulated an idea that seems so obvious to me now, but I'd never really considered. The film actually kind of splits its time 50-50 between the publishing stuff and the family drama stuff, and while the family drama is the less successful half just because it's a little weirdly paced and a little bit more familiar, the characters are so likable and well acted that I rarely found myself getting impatient and wishing it would get back to the meat of the story. I really just had a nice time spending a couple hours with this guy and his family. I think the acting nominations at the Oscars are well deserved, especially for Sterling K. Brown. He's both hilarious and heartbreaking, and you're able to feel a lot about the character and his past without a whole lot of dialogue devoted to it. There's one scene that had me on the verge of tears, and it did so with just one line and a great physical performance. Jeffrey Wright is also great as always, and I'm happy to see him nominated for leading actor. And a couple of the other standouts for me were Tracee Ellis Ross, who doesn't get a whole lot of screen time but makes the most of what she has, and Myra Lucretia Taylor, who was just a bundle of joy. The Winkies guy from Mulholland Drive is also in the opening scene, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about him, but every time he pops up in a movie or TV show, I can't not say, look, it's the Winkies guy. One thing that really surprised me was just how many genuine belly laughs there were in this movie. Most of the funniest moments involve how the white characters are depicted. It's a lot of people who seem like they're earnestly trying to be socially conscious, but just don't understand how. It's very funny in a cringe comedy type of way, but it also functions as a pretty solid blueprint on how not to be an ally. The satire is really sharp, and there's some dynamite writing here. The score by Laura Karpman is nominated for Best Original Score at the Oscars, and honestly, I'm not so sure that's deserved. There are some really lovely piano tracks and one particular theme that I quite liked, but I didn't find any of the rest of it groundbreaking or even particularly notable. The score is fine, it's certainly not bad in any way, it just wasn't exactly amazing, and I'm a little confused as to why it's nominated. Although it is the only female composer who was nominated this year, so, you know, I'll take it. American Fiction is a very good film that I enjoyed quite a bit. To be honest, I don't know if I would get anything else out of a second viewing of this, but I don't really feel I need to, because there was enough on the surface. I got a lot out of it on one watch. It's a very well-made movie that has purposeful, creative choices in the camera work and framing. It's really well written, really well acted. It's just a very enjoyable time at the movies, and I highly recommend it. And I'm going to give American Fiction an 8 out of 10. I also saw the new film from British auteur Jonathan Glazer, The Zone of Interest, and I gotta say, this movie disturbed the fuck out of me, and as you'll know if you're familiar with my reading tastes, it's kinda hard to do that. I haven't seen Jonathan Glazer's first couple of films. Before this, I'd only seen Under the Skin and a short film called The Fall, and I kinda struggled with both of those. The first half hour of Under the Skin is unforgettable and genuinely terrifying. It's impossible to fault on a technical level. The thing looks and sounds fucking amazing. It's one of the best scores I've ever heard, but at one point in the film it takes a turn, and from that point on I find it just kind of a slog to get through, and I've always felt rather empty by the end of it. And not empty in a harrowing cinematic experience kind of way, but just that I felt like I wanted something more out of the film than what it gave me. And same with The Fall, it's really beautifully shot, but I just don't really get anything out of the experience other than looking at pretty images, which isn't really enough for me. The Zone of Interest, on the other hand, is a technical marvel that also happens to pack a wallop of an emotional punch. This film, loosely based on the novel by Martin Amis, follows the family of Rudolf Höss, the longest-serving commandant of Auschwitz. He and his entire family live in a house with a beautiful garden that is on the other side of the fence from the concentration camp. And what makes this film incredibly unique, and also the harrowing experience that it is that we never see on the other side of that wall. We just hear it. And this film is honestly pretty unspoilable because it's not about the story. It's not even really about what you see. It's about the juxtaposition of what you're seeing versus what you're hearing. The life we see play out on screen is shockingly familiar. The children happily splash in the pool, play games in the grass, and go on boat rides with Dad in the nearby river. Rudolph's wife Hedwig passionately tends the garden and invites her mother to come see the Eden that she's built for herself and for her family. The family sees Rudolph off to work every morning, and he goes into meetings to bureaucratically and boringly discuss the most efficient ways to exterminate prisoners in the concentration camps. And as we see all of this play out on screen in total ignorance of what we hear as the audience, it instills a terrifying cognitive dissonance that never goes away. If we can see the smokestacks and hear the furnaces and the gunshots and the dogs barking and the people screaming and the children crying, don't they? And the fact that the answer to that question is yes, and they don't care, is fucking chilling. What Daddy actually does at work is never talked about in this family once, and beneath every line of dialogue lurks a specter of second meaning. There's always an and or a but that's left unsaid, but not in our minds. The kind of voluntary ignorance to suffering that this film portrays is unfortunately a deeply human problem that we have not gotten over. I live in a city with a large and very visible homeless population, and it's incredibly common to see posts on our subreddit with a heading like "The homeless population is out of control," and instead of sharing resources on how to help these people, or brainstorming ideas, or just showing even the slightest bit of fucking empathy, these absolute cunts will just commiserate about how fucking hard it is to see a person struggling from outside their front window and how we need to get the cops to come get all these junkies and put them behind bars. Or just listen to the way anyone who supports Israel talks about dead Palestinian children and you'll get my point. The reason I'm bringing this stuff up is because this film genuinely made me reflect on my complicity in others' suffering in a way that most films aren't really able to do. The experience of this film kind of made me confront the fact that I live in a country that is currently sponsoring a genocide on the other side of the world, and I don't want to be a part of that. And as long as people keep up this voluntary ignorance of what's actually going on, our tax dollars are going to keep supporting murdering children. Okay, tangent over. I don't love talking about this kind of thing in my movie videos that are just supposed to be fun and informal, but it did seem like kind of the elephant in the room to address a current genocide in my discussion of a movie about a historical genocide. But back to the actual filmmaking, the cinematography is very clinical, almost in a hidden camera documentary style. There are lots of long takes and reused angles, and at no point does the film feel visually exciting, but it's always exactly calculated and very nice to look at. The visual style is subdued yet professional because the sound is where it's really at. The sound design throughout is absolutely incredible, but the real aural standout of this film is the music that only appears at 3 points throughout the film. There's a musical prologue against a black screen, a soundscape about halfway through the film, and then the epilogue and credits. And the music by Mika Levy, who also did Under the Skin, is deep and detailed and haunting and otherworldly, ethereal. It's like nothing I've ever heard before. It's fucking incredible. The Zone of Interest has really stuck with me. It is a very disturbing watch that isn't enjoyable at all, but is very worthwhile. Clearly I had a very emotional response to this film, and I know that it'll haunt me for quite some time, which honestly is probably a good thing, because this isn't something we should ever forget, and we should never be ignorant to the suffering of others. And The Zone of Interest gets a big fat 10 out of 10. I also saw a film called Out of Darkness. This is the first film from director Andrew Cumming and was originally released in 2022 in the UK under the title The Origin, and it's just received its North American theatrical release. I'm assuming they changed the title to avoid conflict with the new film from Ava DuVernay. Out of Darkness is set 40,000 years in the Earth's past, and it follows a small group of nomads who are exploring a new land looking for a settled home, and they are stalked by a creature in the woods. Now, I'd venture to guess you've never heard of this movie, and I hadn't either. I wanted to go to the theater, and this was the only thing playing that held any remote interest for me. It was honestly either this, that bad Bob Marley biopic, or Madame Web. So even though I would have been shocked if this movie was great, I still thought it would probably be better than those other two options, and for myself, I was probably right. This movie is pretty much exactly the survival thriller that it sounds like. It is quite a tropey, derivative film, but with that said, there are a couple of unique elements to this film that make it a little bit more interesting than other tropey survival thrillers. For starters, it's actually quite well shot, and there are some moments of really beautiful cinematography. It was filmed in the Scottish Highlands, but parts of it looked almost like Iceland, and it's clear that this director has a really good knack for evoking environment through film. I'm not sure I would quite go as far as to say that the film is dripping with authenticity or anything, but there is, at the very least, an admirable effort there. Throughout the entire film, the characters speak a fictional language, and some of the actors do a better job than others of selling it. It did take me a little bit to settle into it because I was really hyper-focused on whether or not it seemed like this was a natural language that these characters actually spoke, and not just phonetics that were written out in a script. But from what I can tell from some behind-the-scenes footage, it seems that a lot of care was really put into this language, and the actors seemed really excited about learning it, so I just think it's pretty cool that that extra step was taken for immersion, even if it doesn't work 100% of the time. I also appreciate that this film doesn't really hold back with the gore. There are some gruesome images that have really stuck with me, and that the camera will linger on for kind of a long time. Where this film doesn't necessarily shine, though, is in its script. The story and dialogue are incredibly tropey. There's really nothing interesting or unique that happens in this movie, and unfortunately the third act takes one of the most predictable and nonsensical turns that can happen in a movie like this, and it's all in favor of an ending and message that just isn't earned. And honestly, that's about it. I've already forgotten a good chunk of this movie. It's one of those instances where you can watch the trailer, and if it seems interesting to you, then you'll probably enjoy the movie to some degree, but if it doesn't, there's nothing here to win you over. I had a pretty good time watching it and didn't regret buying a ticket, but I also was under the influence of substances that are legal where I live, but there also were elements of the filmmaking that I was able to appreciate. I'll never watch it again, and I probably won't even remember it existed within a year from now, but to be honest, I did enjoy it for what it was worth, and so I'm giving this one a generous 6 out of 10. And that's it for this video. Next time I'll probably be talking about Imaginary and Dune Part 2, and whatever else I see in the next couple weeks. Also, if you have been missing my book content, don't worry, I'm not done with that. I'm just working on some long-term videos. I'm still working my way through 2023 horror releases, and I want to make a video ranking all the ones that I personally was interested in checking out. And probably sooner than that, I would like to make a video about some scary short stories, so look forward to those and my next installment of Ticket Stubs. I'm Carmilla du Maurier, and I will see you in hell.